here's your hosts of Truth Matters, Tom Donahue and Angeline Marie, seeking truth and promoting liberty.
Good day and welcome America and beyond. I'm Tom Donahue with my co-host Angeline Marie, and I'm filing this report for Truth Matters and, of course, Tom Donahue Reports. I am sticking to the Epstein files, even though Trump would admonish me and anyone that is talking about this because it's a hoax, remember? And he's been absolved of all his sins, whether it's sins of omission or sins of commission, as it relates to his relationship and what he knew and what he may have endeavored in or experienced in the Epstein universe. Remember, he was his best friend for more than 10 years. Well, I'll tell you, the hits just keep coming. There are so many allegations pointing towards the $1 million man, more than 1 million mentions, Donald Trump, and the Epstein files, which now have been renamed. And I helped start the trend, I think, but I'm not the only one now that calls it the Trump-Epstein files or the Epstein-Trump files. I want to mention, and I think I'm going to have to bring this back, the Hall of Fame and the Hall of Shamers. But in the Hall of Shame is the Dwarf and the Creep. That's right, the Dwarf and the Creep from the Fox Follies, the Fox, the Five, and that's the little comedian, Gutfeld, and the Creep, which is Jeese Walters. So Greg Gutfeld, Jeese Walters, Hall of Shamers. This is what they had to say last week when they giggled and joked about Epstein as a sex rabbi and fixer. Unbelievable. And I've posted at TalkStream Live, and the article originated from Mediaite. How could anything relating to Epstein be funny? Now, if those on the left, Colbert and Kimmel, and if they were joking about Epstein in any way, shape, or form, and what he did, those heinous acts, they would be castigated and they would be rebuked. So I'm rebuking the two Hall of Shamers. And I've talked about those two before. And we'll probably have to do a little more investigating because I have covered this in prior podcasts. But back to the main meat on the bone. And I'm going to go to some news headlines. And here was something also from media. Yes, it's a cover-up. Epstein files. DOJ asking you to trust it. Yeah, just trust Pam Bondi, the bombastic one. I was going to say blonde bomber, but she bombed in the hearing. Remember that? We talked about bombastic, bonkers Bondi. Nancy Mace, South Carolina representative, she slams the DOJ over letter about the Epstein files release being complete. She says, no, they're missing names. Now, Bondi's trying to confuse and obfuscate when she released in this so-called final release, she put all like 300 plus names that mixed Trump in there with the Obamas and Clintons and anyone that had any mention. None of them had 1 million mentions like Trump. But they're not going to confuse the general populace. Even the MAGA faithful are falling away. Now, Representative Massey, who's been quite the crusader with Kohana, Democrat, that have helped spearhead this, along with Marjorie Taylor Greene. But these two are the true heroes and crusaders that no matter what the name calling was, no matter what the threats were, they did not relent. They did not give in or give up. So Massey said on one of the news programs, he said, this is the Epstein administration, and Trump is still in the Epstein class. Yeah, that's right. Now, hilarious, hellish Hillary Clinton, as she spoke about the Epstein connections and the files, she said, we have no links. You may not specifically, but you were well aware that your husband was taking many flights and was very involved with Epstein. So this is not just picking on Donald Trump. I mean, the Clintons, I was one of the early exposers of the Clintons back in the 90s. when I talked to the troopers with Troopergate, and we did, Whitewater, and we did the body count and all the missing people and the silenced people and the attacks on all the women accusers of Bill Clinton. So I've been there, done that. Hillary Clinton does say the GOP is using the Epstein probe to shield Trump. Well, Bannon, remember we talked about Bannon with him being the media coach and advisor to Epstein and the video that was released. And at first we didn't know exactly where this was discovered, but it was in the Epstein files. Certain people were able to get that and put it out there. And that's why I said, we discovered this on the internet and on YouTube. And so it actually did emanate from Epstein files. Now, Bannon was still, as we mentioned in the prior show, talking with Epstein right around the time of his second set of charges that came, later on, like in 2018, 2019. Bannon was still advising him. And at that time, besides, consulting with him in terms of how to craft the narrative, he confided in Epstein that he backed the 25th Amendment and the removal of Trump and how they could do that. And then even after this, we found out that he was conspiring with Epstein to try to bring down the Vatican. Yeah. I mean, now I had said that Kellyanne Conway and Steve Bannon were losers and leakers in the first administration, which I think I was proved right. Now, Kellyanne Conway did play a pivotal role in getting Donald Trump elected first time, because her polling company and the polling data put him in the right spots in that final week that he was able to get over the finish line and beat Hillary Clinton. Well, beyond Trump's being implicated in some ways here, we now know that so-called Prince Andrew, one of the royals, he has now been arrested and has been charged. So it's looking like even the royals are going down. So if someone that close to the King of England, his brother, a prince, can be arrested and charged, why can we not be charging many culprits who are co-conspirators that paid secret agreements and paid fines? Why aren't those names prominently not only listed specifically, but why aren't charges being brought against them rather than paying Bondi and Kash Patel is chugging beers at the Olympics and jet setting to his young girlfriend in Tennessee rather than attending to these type of matters? And as I mentioned, that Bondi never apologized, didn't recognize the survivors or victims in the gallery, and is never given any updates. Trump has never met with any of them, shows no empathy whatsoever. It's a pretty dark day in America as it relates to the fact that we have an administration, for obvious reasons, at least to yours truly, for not taking action. Although they all said Trump is his son Don Jr., Dan Bongino, Pam Bondi, remember the client list on her desk? But they all said and all lobbied for this release when they were not officially in office. How things have changed. Now, speaking of body counts, remember I mentioned about the Clintons and Whitewater and all their murky dealings and people that were mysteriously vanishing. They're now saying, based on information from the Epstein files, that it was alleged that there were bodies buried at the ranch or in and around the ranch in New Mexico. I did allude to this before in a prior podcast or show, that there have been accusers that have contacted the FBI and other law enforcement agencies about Trump's wrongdoing. And of course, Epstein and Maxwell, but it now resurfaced, and you see some podcasters and some even MAGA influencers jumping on this. I looked at the information myself too. And again, we're just saying he is accused. We don't know for certain, but based on this headline, it said, woman who credibly accused Trump of sex with a minor reportedly had her records removed from the Epstein files. So they were there and then they weren't there. And then there's been others that said that Trump was in the room when some activities went on. And then there's the $22,500 check that Epstein has posted, displayed in various parts of his mansion, that talked about how Trump bought one of the girls. Remember when Trump used the language that Epstein stole some of his girls like they were property? Again, these are allegations that need to be investigated and see if they can be substantiated.